The saving your way out of debt rationale. When I start to introduce the saving your way out of debt approach to clients and at conferences, people often respond with blank stares and furrowed brows. My audience sometimes includes accountants and other money professionals, people who understand numbers. But shouldn't you pay down high interest debt before starting low interest saving? They asked. This perfectly logical, mathematical, accurate thinking is what keeps people caught in a cycle of debt. In reality, we usually spend our way into debt, so we have to save our way out of debt. Remember, financial recovery is not just a process about numbers or an exercise in math. This is a relationship with money. The math also works to your advantage eventually, but for now, let's look beyond the math at why debt and savings must be inextricably linked for this process to work emotionally as well as mathematically. Take a sample client, Emily, a young chiropractor. Like accountants, she assumed that saving would come later after she'd paid down her debt. But she learned that by saving her way out of debt, she could build a life of financial stability instead of yo-yo debting. So we'll follow Emily's story throughout this chapter to learn about the successful strategy of saving your way out of debt. Case study. Emily spent her first 4 years out of chiropractic school working in a group practice in Los Angeles, but she'd always dreamed of opening her own office in the San Francisco Bay Area where her family lived. It took a lot to relocate and start her practice there. Between business expenses, malpractice insurance, and living expenses, Emily found that her income didn't always stretch as far as she would have liked. On top of this, she had gut-busting payments on her student loans. It felt as if she'd never be able to pay them off. Through college and chiropractic school, and then the long hours of establishing a new practice, Emily had worked hard for a very long time. In her limited free time, she felt as though she deserved a little pampering, whether it was through shopping with her friends or enjoying San Francisco's fine dining. Emily had a part-time receptionist, but didn't feel she could afford a bookkeeper too, so she did the insurance billing herself on the weekends. Because she had a hard time keeping up with the insurance billings, there was sometimes quite a lag before these checks came. During gaps between payments, Emily relied on credit cards to make up the shortfall. As the balances rose, she felt increasingly worried. When reimbursement checks did arrive, Emily promptly paid her credit card balances down to zero. Instantly, she felt relief. Each time, she swore that she'd not run up her cards again, but once the relief of paying them off had faded and regular life resumed, she found herself repeating the cycle. Even when Emily exercised great restraint on optional expenses, something always seemed to happen. One month her car needed new tires, another her best friend asked her to be her maid of honor, so Emily used her credit cards to buy her bridesmaid's dress. In addition to feeling stressed, Emily was embarrassed. In college, I graduated summa cum laude, she said, but when it comes to money, I just don't seem to be able to figure things out. Emily kept telling herself that she'd start a savings account with the next insurance check. She wanted the comfort of a financial cushion, but when each check arrived, it simply didn't make sense to her to get low interest in a savings account while she was paying high interest to creditors. When people are struggling with debt, they often make the same choice Emily did. They assume they should throw all their available money at their debt. It feels silly to them to put money in a savings account that earns almost nothing in interest when paying 20 to 30% in interest on credit cards. Although this line of thinking sounds mathematically logical, there's a big problem with it. It is very short-term thinking. It works to pay off your debt with all your available money only if you assume that tomorrow the world ends. Okay, to be less dramatic, it works to throw all your available money at your debt only if you assume that nothing out of the ordinary will ever happen again. But the only thing you can be sure of is that life happens. Surprise expenses will always crop up, no matter how thoroughly you plan. And many people pay for these surprises with credit cards, and using their cards while trying to pay down their debt leaves them very frustrated. Before we explore the steps in saving your way out of debt, I want you to fully grasp how the debt cycle works. Assume for a moment that you get the lovely surprise of a tax refund. You use the whole thing to pay down a whopper of a credit card bill. Phew, that's a relief. You vow that you'll pay your card in full every month from then on, and that you'll start putting money into savings. Now envision something happening. your water heater springs a leak, or you need to take your cat to the vet, or your kids need back to school clothes. Remember those periodic expenses that we've talked about. All those non-monthly, irregular expenses that always seem to surprise us. Good surprises, bad surprises, everyday expenses, they all cost money. Where will the money come from to pay for these things? You used all your available money to pay down your debt. There sits that credit card with a big fat zero balance. It has begun to seem like your personal emergency savings account. Almost certainly, you'll end up having to charge those expenses. Once this happens, it's easy to feel as though you've blown it and then slip into oh well thinking. The familiar pattern of charging starts all over again and the debt cycle resumes. Not having savings is a major reason people get into debt. Even when they don't have problems controlling their spending, the cycle is vicious. The question is, are you ready to exit the cycle? The debt pyramid. The ultimate goal is to eliminate debt entirely, but most people can't achieve this goal in one step. Instead, they need to work toward it systematically. Inspired by Maslow's hierarchy of needs, I view the journey out of debt in a hierarchy as well. There are 100 programs out there for reducing and eliminating debt. If you've ever had a sleepless night and tuned into late-night TV, you've likely seen somebody selling a system for managing debt. They know their audience. Worries about debt often keep people awake. There are 3 big flaws in most debt reduction programs. They skip level 1, debt stabilization, starting prematurely on reducing debt before it has been stabilized. Number 2, they don't address savings at all, so when life happens, a credit card is the only option. Number 3, they don't take emotional factors, needs, and feelings of deprivation into account. These approaches might help get out of debt in the short term, but they offer nothing for staying out of debt. Financial recovery is different. So let's get started with step 1. It's time to stabilize. Level 1 of the debt pyramid, debt stabilization. The bottom level of the debt pyramid, and the first step to freeing yourself from the debt cycle, is debt stabilization. This step is at the base of the pyramid, just as basic survival was at the base of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. As the foundation for eventually living completely debt-free, it is the biggest part of the pyramid. It's also the hardest step to take because it requires you to shift your thinking entirely about your relationship with debt. Getting and staying out of debt requires a fundamental psychological and emotional shift. If you're driving down the highway at 65 miles an hour and you need to back up, you can't just jam the car into reverse. You have to first bring your vehicle to a stop. Similarly, you cannot simultaneously continue using credit cards as part of your monthly money management while stabilizing your debt. That would be like trying to go forward and backward at the same time and expecting to make progress. That's a big image to take in. Stabilizing debt means that you stop adding to it. Note that debt stabilization is quite different from debt reduction. Debt stabilization simply means that you are no longer incurring new debt. It's not about getting out of debt. That will happen later. Until you stabilize your debt, you'll stay locked in the vicious cycle of paying down credit cards only to run them up again. This also goes for Klarna and Afterpay, that until you stop creating more of those, you'll be locked in that cycle of paying down debt from your past rather than making choices about your future. Debt stabilization is about creating new financial habits and attitudes so that you don't create more debt. Imagine knowing that when the next surprise expense hits, you'll be able to pay for it without charging it. That is what debt stabilization is all about. I have seen for many people how good it feels to know you can take care of yourself without hurting yourself. In other words, without having to use a credit card. Most people skip debt stabilization and start right into reducing their debt. In other words, paying it down. This desire is very understandable. Debt feels awful and we want it gone. Emily was doing this. She wanted her debt gone, but she was trying to reduce her debt while simultaneously adding more debt to it. Starting prematurely with paying down your debt while you're still either using your credit cards or in danger of using them if something happens keeps you stuck in the debt cycle for decades. This is like sitting in a boat with a grapefruit-sized hole on the side and bailing out the gushing water with a thimble. You can never get ahead of the leak. Similarly, you simply cannot get out of debt if you are still in danger of incurring new debt. Surprise expenses will crop up. They always do. This shift of perspective may be hard, and I know that the thought of not using credit cards can bring up fear or feelings of overwhelm. It may mean that you have to temporarily get very, very creative at meeting your needs if you don't resort to doing so with your charge card. But you can do this. This is why spending plans are covered first and ways to meet your needs are tackled before tackling debt. And if you've built a monthly spending plan, you have the tool that you need to find the ways to live within your means without going into more debt, without charging any of your bills or expenses. But for now, sometimes the only possible step is to trust the process. You may be thinking, but I am stabilizing my debt. I'm paying more than the minimum payments. That is great. But if you're continuing to use the credit cards while you're paying them down, you're still trying to bail out water while more rushes through the hole. And it will take you a lot longer to get out of debt if you do it this way. Even if you manage to get ahead of the water and bail out more than is coming in through the hole, you can never ever rest. The hole will always let in more water. Even if you're tired, you can't stop bailing the water. You must plug the hole first. That's what debt stabilization is stopping creating more debt if you want your debt to not grow again. And that is the way to stop going up and down and up and down and up. If you remember, in your spending plan, you've created a category for debt repayment. You may be able to only make minimum payments, and that is fine for now. As long as you are paying at least minimum payments on every debt regularly and on time and not charging anything further, you're stabilizing debt. Is this ideal? No, of course not. Is this alone going to get you out of debt quickly? No. But this is where to start. This is the part that many debt repayment programs, systems skip. This is about bringing that racing debt car to a stop before trying to reverse it. This can be a good time to take a breath, press pause, and as we continue, you'll see how we can start moving the debt in reverse. The savings pyramid. You may have been thinking that the next step after stabilizing debt would be to move up the debt pyramid to reducing and then eliminating debt. Instead, this is the point when we must link debt to savings. It is important to understand that these two seemingly separate things actually go hand in hand. Not having savings is a major reason people get into debt. You spend your way into debt, now you must save your way out of it. By creating periodic savings after you've stabilized your debt, you can climb out of the black hole of chronic debting. The savings pyramid, as with the debt pyramid, has the bottom level, called periodic savings, forming the firm foundation of your relationship with savings, and it is one of the keys to saving your way out of debt. Periodic savings is for anticipated, non-monthly expenses, so car registrations, license renewals, taxes, doctor's visits, memberships, vacations. So it's both fun and not always fun things. We tend to think of our savings as something we should never touch. If we do touch it, it means we've blown it and we feel guilty, we feel defeated, we start to wonder what the point was. But there are different kinds of savings for different intentions in your life. Looking at the pyramid, there are 3 different levels of savings. The base level is this periodic savings. The safety net savings is the next level, level 2. This money is meant to be used if you have an interruption in income. Long-term investments comprise the third type of savings. So starting at this base foundational level with periodic savings. Periodic savings are the most important type of savings when you want to stabilize and break free from the debt cycle. It is one of the keys to making your entire financial life finally work. Without periodic savings, your financial situation is a house of cards. Even if you have investment savings or equity in your house, without periodic savings, your other assets are at risk. Simply put, periodic savings is money you set aside to help cover your periodic expenses. You build a certain amount into your personal spending plan each month and deposit that money into a simple savings account, not an investment account, because you need to be able to access and use this money, so that when a periodic expense arises, such as a car repair or a family vacation, you simply transfer that money back into your primary checking account and pay for the expense. You don't end up putting it on a credit card. Keep in mind that your periodic savings is meant to be used guilt-free. You are setting aside this money to care for periodic or non-monthly expenses, car registrations, taxes, membership dues, etc., rather than charging them. Being without periodic savings is a sure way to keep on charging and to never be free of debt. Every month, I deposit money into my periodic savings account, which is a savings account attached to my checking account. It feels good to put money into it, but it also feels good to sometimes use it. I feel like I have taken care of myself, that I've thought ahead for myself, that I was considering my future self. When a periodic expense comes along, expected or not, I first try to pay for it without using the savings. Every time I have a non-regular expense or something that I didn't remember or know to put in the spending plan, I don't automatically transfer money from savings. We're all used to absorbing these expenses as best we can. The trouble comes when you can't absorb all of them, or when too many expenses hit at once. And when that does happen, and it happens to me, then I transfer money from my periodic savings account so I don't have to put anything on a credit card. Of course, at the beginning of some months, I know I'm going to use some of my periodic savings to help me. My car insurance is paid every 6 months, and so when I can, I put more into that savings account so that in March and October, that money is already there. Or when I go on a big trip, I plan on using some of that periodic savings. So periodic expenses are not always unfortunate ones. Some of them we love. Hopefully, if it's not within our spending plan, we're not buying a big fancy bag every month. It's not part of our monthly spending plan. But to give ourselves that periodically over the year, those are some of those expenses that we love and that we can plan ahead for and take care of ourselves in advance. Something like a beautiful purse or nice pair of shoes that are more for fun and less functional, and vacations. Who does not like those things? What we don't like is their debt aftermath. But when a vacation or an amazing item of clothing or purse is paid for with funds previous us has set aside for us in advance, we discover a whole new level of rest and relaxation while we're enjoying that item or on vacation. In your spending plan, you create categories for anticipated non-monthly expenses. And those need to be paid from somewhere, right? Your monthly plan may cover some or all of these, but those whose spending plans are tight tend to pay for these non-monthly expenses by, you guessed it, putting them on a credit card or creating a repayment plan through Klarna or Afterpay, something like that. So if you look towards the top of your spending plan, there is a category called periodic savings. When you have a periodic expense that you can't cover, you can transfer money from this savings account into your primary account and pay for the expense. You won't have to put it on a credit card. That's the way of absorbing that cost without creating more debt. Having this savings will stabilize not only your financial life, but any worry and stress too. Often, for many people, this sounds impossible at this point. How do you save if your monthly plan is already tight? Even on tight plans, savings must be a priority. Without saving, those periodic expenses, whether they're expected or not, cannot be covered without accruing more debt or otherwise destabilizing your debt. And then the cycle continues, and again, nothing has changed. Going back to that first level of the debt pyramid, debt stabilization is dependent on periodic savings, the first level of the savings pyramid. This is on page 24 of the PDF. The only way to keep debt stabilized, to not add to your debt, is to have a way to pay for periodic expenses when they occur. The process of getting out of debt and staying out is inextricably linked to the process of saving. Once you have implemented these two basic, yes, difficult, but essential parts of these pyramids, only then are you free to move farther up the hierarchy toward financial freedom. As a side note, this is why I sometimes have clients reduce their contributions as long as they're getting all the free money from any match possibilities, so that they can shift into this foundational level of the savings pyramid when maybe their pyramid was misweighted and toppling, teetering on the tippy part of the pyramid because people were contributing more to retirement than their monthly plan could afford. So how do you fund your periodic savings account? You may be wondering where you're supposed to find the money to deposit into your periodic savings every month, and the answer might seem counterintuitive. One place to look is your monthly debt payments. If you're paying more than minimums on your credit card, but saving nothing, then you are setting yourself up for inevitable problems down the road. Now, of course, this is only working if you have your debt stabilized at this point. So for a time, it might be necessary to reduce credit card payments above the minimum and put any of that extra money into periodic savings. An example would be if you regularly pay $1,000 in debt repayments, but your minimum payments add up to $750, consider paying only $750 a month and putting that remaining $250 into your monthly periodic savings account. Now, I have seen many clients who feel that pain of the weight of the debt. And so they say, oh, let me just make another payment to my credit card without looking at their entire month of where that money might actually help them in their money flow and where they could be saving and waiting on that payment until their debt really is stabilized and their savings are stabilizing as well. If you pay the $1,000 and your car breaks down next month, how will you avoid putting those repairs on a credit card? If you've only made the minimum payments for a while and focus on stabilizing your debt, that's better. Otherwise, you will likely be very frustrated when something does happen and you're forced to pull out that credit card. Of course, if you can build a little extra into your debt repayment plan above the minimums without going into deprivation mode, and still making a periodic savings contribution, then in those months, by all means, do that. But that's taking a comprehensive look at what your whole month will look like rather than reacting off of an emotional feeling of what the debt feels like right now. Accountants and math experts among you might be calculating. Of course, interest on credit accounts will be higher than the interest you're earning through any savings account. Mathematically, that is true. But we're dealing with more than math here. We're creating a way for you to break the debt cycle and keep your debt stable while still living your life and meeting your emotional, financial, and spiritual needs. Besides, if you're currently paying more than minimum payments, you've probably been paying interest for years. Making minimum payments for a short while longer in order to move toward reducing and eliminating debt forever will end up paying for itself 1,000 times during the course of your future financial life. So again, this is a measure of your future self-care, the choices you can make right now that either hurt your future self by creating debt or help heal and nurture your future self by paying less in interest in the future. By creating periodic savings, you can climb out of the deep hole of debting and keep from falling back in. If you want to stop debting, you have to start saving. So we can pause now, or you can hear about Emily. We can come back to Emily. So after Emily began working the financial recovery process, the first thing she did to stop the debt cycle was to stop charging. She tucked her credit cards into a safe place and switched to a cash system. That is, she paid for everything with the money she had, even though she was using her debit card or wrote checks, even paid her bills online, it was out of her checking account. She committed to not using a credit card. She spent only the money she had in her account at the moment. She continued to track all her spending, and Emily recognized that her impulse buys were automatically reduced because spending her actual money, not using borrowed money, and tracking made her more conscious of and connected to her money. By converting to a cash-only system and building a reasonable spending plan that took care of her needs along the way, Emily stabilized her debt. Into Emily's monthly spending plan, we built minimum payments on her existing credit card balance and her student loan. At first, it was hard for her to resist paying more, but she trusted this process of financial recovery and gave it a try. When her next insurance check arrived, rather than completely paying off her credit card debt, Emily created a savings account that was designed for periodic, non-monthly expenses. A couple of months later, when she hosted a friend's bridal shower, she was able to pay for it, guilt-free and in cash, without touching her credit card. She continued this pattern of transferring a portion of each insurance check into savings until she felt prepared for non-monthly expenses such as her car repairs and other anticipated fun expenses. Because she was self-employed, she also had to plan for quarterly taxes and insurance, and she also earmarked part of her savings for a getaway weekend she and her girlfriends wanted to take 6 months later. Having a savings account to use for periodic expenses combined with stabilizing her debt, that is, not continuing to charge anything on a credit card or take out any payment plans, built a very firm foundation for Emily's future, for her future saving and her future debt reduction. It freed her from the debt cycle and provided her with peace of mind. Once you have your debt stabilized and are funding your periodic savings, then you can look at starting to reduce your debt. Please note that if you try to start with debt reduction while you're still using credit cards, it's going to be nearly impossible. Stabilizing debt really affects the effectiveness of reducing debt.